process, but it will also say we are going to create a new set of authorities that are not limited, that limited the ICTS application, frankly, the 70s era law, IEPA, that and the Berman amendments that have modified that unfortunately the Trump and Biden administration have had to rely on up to this point. And what our new set of rules do is not only takes on existing hardware, software, and mobile apps, but we've said we need to make sure that we are extensive enough to look forward, so that we're going to include AI products and services, fintech, quantum communications, and e-commerce, all areas that were not covered earlier. The Restrict Act would give the Secretary of Commerce the authority and the responsibility to identify and counter threats from foreign technology products and services in the U.S., a series of mitigation tools given to the Secretary up to and including the opportunity to ban. It's genuinely risk-based, and it is a rule-bound process rather than the current ad hoc process. It's also Intel-informed. We've made sure we've involved the FCC, the ODNI, DOD, and one of the things that I think is particularly important, particularly as we try to make the case, remember when we tried to make the case around Huawei, we've got to have our intelligence community be forward-leaning at being willing to declassify the information about why some of these technologies, foreign-based technologies, pose national security risks. So we're not just asking the public to trust us. Consequently, in developing this legislation, we have worked with the Commerce Department, the Justice Department, ODNI, Treasury, National Security Council, and I think you'll shortly be seeing a statement from the White House. Truth is, with 100 million Americans daily on TikTok on an average of 90 minutes a day, this is an issue. I imagine most of you would like your networks to get 90 minutes a day from 100 million Americans. We've got to make sure that we take care of that national security-based concern. The Restrict Act is more than about TikTok. It will give us that comprehensive approach. I do, as I could turn over to Senator Thune, and then we're going to ask our colleagues in the order that are on the sheet here. When we get to the question period, we're going to be pretty ruthless about making sure we stick to this topic. If we've got other topics we can come back to afterwards. With that, let me turn it over to my co-sponsor and lead, Senator John Thune. John?
Thanks, Mark. Well, I'm grateful for the opportunity to work on this legislation and to partner with Senator Warner. A number of our colleagues are, as he said, our team's staffs have worked closely together over the past several weeks refining this legislation. It is widely acknowledged that TikTok's a threat to our national security, which is why Congress took steps last year to ban the platform on government devices. And before TikTok, as Mark pointed out, Congress had to take steps to remove Huawei, ZTE, and ZTE from our telecommunications networks. In my view, we do need an approach that does away with this whack-a-mole with this particular technology and with adversarial nations, and come up with a more systemic process in which to examine these risks and to act on them. I've long been concerned about how every social media company uses the data it collects from users, and I've introduced a number of bipartisan pieces of legislation to bring more transparency to big tech. But I'm particularly concerned about TikTok's connections to the Chinese Communist Party, which repeatedly spies on American citizens. It was reported last year that China-based employees of ByteDance have repeatedly accessed non-public data about users in the U.S. despite TikTok saying to the contrary. And as Senator Warner pointed out, both the Trump and the Biden administrations recognize the need for a robust process in place to evaluate the threats that are posed by foreign technology. This legislation builds on those efforts by establishing a comprehensive process within the Department of Commerce to mitigate, and which ultimately could lead, I would add, to banning platforms like TikTok. The Chinese Communist Party has proven over the last few years that is willing to lie about just about everything. That likely won't end with TikTok, which is why it's important to establish a holistic and methodical approach to the challenges that are posed by technology from foreign adversaries. It's safe to assume that if the CCP is willing to lie about its spy balloon and cover up the origins of the worst pandemic in 100 years, they'll lie about using TikTok to spy on American citizens. It's high time we address this issue. I think this legislation goes about it in the right way and deals with some of the attacks have been made in the past constitutionally about how you approach specific or individual companies. But I'm pleased to be working with my colleagues on this, and I hope that this is one of those issues that we can work in a bipartisan way to solve, to get something on the President's desk and start to attack this problem. Thank you. Next up is the Senator from West Virginia, Senator Manchin.
Thanks, Senator Thune. First of all, thank you to my dear friend Mark Warner, working so hard and diligently, and John Thune for putting this together, because it's a piece of legislation that's needed. You know, I remember Huawei was our most recent. We had ZTE and Gaspart and all them. I remember all those because we were basically threatened directly with our government and what we thought was going to be pertinent information. I can't say that I know a whole lot about TikTok. Could I ask a question here? Because I called my granddaughters, who are recent graduates, college graduates. But if I could ask, just show of hands maybe, how many of y'all use TikTok? Come on. Come on. Come. Okay, let's just say this. We asked for your advice. So I called my granddaughters and I said, tell me about this TikTok. Oh, they said, we use it all the time. They said, oh, yeah, all of our friends, all of our young friends. Now, these are 22 to 25-year-olds. And they said, oh, yeah, that's what I said. I said, well, we have a concern. They said, oh, please, you know, be careful what you do here, because it's something how we communicate and we all enjoy it. So it's something very, very popular, as Senator Warner said, 100 million people, okay? And mostly a younger generation, I would assume. So I said, let me ask you this. The information that you're basically putting on there, which the younger age groups, you all want to seem to tell everything, so everybody in the world knows what you're doing, when you're doing it, and how you're doing it. And I said, with that, that's fine. That's the way you communicate. I said, but how about if people use that and later on it comes back to bite you pretty bad through artificial intelligence? They know exactly. They're basically saying that, have your picture with my granddaughters and have your picture and your name associated with it, and have you saying things you've never said, because they know who you are and they know what you basically attain to and what's your favorite for you and what your normalities may be. I said, would you be concerned then? They said, oh, yeah. And they said, well, can't you find an American platform? And I said, well, that's what we're looking for. We've got countries, and the 4 countries I'll identify that we know don't have our values. China, most importantly, Russia, Iran, North Korea. They're not going to have our best interest at heart, and they're going to use basically any information they receive in the most detrimental way possible. And it'll come back sooner or later to bite us. That's what we were concerned about. So the 3 that we basically have gone over and gone after and banned, this is one that's probably as serious, if not more serious, than the 3, because of the amount of people that are using it. So I applaud again my colleagues and Senator Warner and Senator Thune for leading this, to bring this to a head so we know. But also we have to realize there's an awful lot of people that are using it, enjoy it, and would be looking for something that will replace it in a much safer manner. So with all that, I applaud. I look forward to the next chapter of whatever we work on, but it'll be something that we can make much safer than what this is. Thank you. And now I would turn it over to Senator Romney.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. I'll tell you, when you see Senator Thune and Senator Warner come together, and this many from both sides of the aisle come together on a major piece of legislation. We're not talking about a post office being named or a highway being named. We're talking about a major piece of competitive and foreign policy legislation. When we come together, it says that Congress has recognized that China is not our dear friend. The Chinese Communist Party, that is not our dear friend. And any question about what China intends to do and what authoritarians tend to do is able to be seen by their treatment of the people in Hong Kong, the Uyghur people within China. You can see what authoritarians want to do by watching what Russia is doing in Ukraine. We have to recognize that we face geopolitical adversaries that are serious and threaten our security, our prosperity, and even the peace and freedom that we enjoy. This piece of legislation is designed to help protect Americans and protect America and our friends. There are a lot of us that are concerned about privacy. And we say, gosh, we don't want the government to know everything we're doing. We want to protect our personal privacy. Well, one thing a lot worse than having our government infringe on our privacy is having the Chinese Communist Party infringe on our privacy and be able to track us and follow us. And whether it's with social media or other technologies, communication technologies, or the hardware that they devise over the coming years, we have to make sure that we have the resources in place and the authorities in place to stop those things before they endanger us. I'm really proud to support this legislation and join my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to do something which is necessary, overdue, and critical to get passed as soon as possible. With that, Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Thank you, everybody. It's good to be here with you. I think the bipartisan leadership that's up here today demonstrates that a Washington consensus that's been here for about 50 years has now come to an end. And the idea that we're in the face of China pursuing a China-first strategy at the detriment of everything else that we might hold dear is over, and that we're not going to allow them simply to pursue their strategy and allow us to be collateral damage. We've watched too long as they've stolen our IP, as they've implemented telecommunications equipment around the world that puts the world at risk of their surveillance scheme, as they've, as Senator Romney was just saying, exported their own surveillance state in China and around the world. This is doing damage to humanity. And I think what you're seeing are Republicans and Democrats coming together and saying it needs to come to an end. And today in America, TikTok, just to name one platform, more than 100 million Americans, almost 90 minutes a day, are on a platform that the Beijing won't even allow its own people to use. You know, is calling digital opium, but is happy for us to consume 3 weeks out of the year on their social media platform, which they won't even share with their own people, and are subject to the dictates of the Chinese Communist Party when it comes to the data that people are unwittingly in many places serving up to TikTok and to ByteDance. That's why I wrote to Apple and Google and said, let's take it off your app stores. And as Chairman Warner said, TikTok's only the latest example, but we know it's not going to be the last. And we need Congress to move beyond the whack-a-mole solution that we have been focused on and have a more strategic approach. And that's why I'm extremely pleased to be on this bill. I'm grateful to Chairman Warner and for Chairman Thune for their leadership as well. I do think we're going to pass this. And I think this is going to be the beginning of the United States saying we are not going to be collateral damage, and we're going to take our future in our own destiny. And with that, I think Senator Sullivan, my friend from Alaska, is next.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Now I'm even happier that I'm on this bill.
Well, I want to thank Senator Warner, Senator Thune, particularly Senator Warner. I mean, if you look at his background, both his private sector experience in technology and chairman of the Intel Committee, this is an individual who really knows the threat that we're facing, and I think it's great to be here with him. And this bipartisan group of senators, I think, really cements what I've been saying for quite a long time. Yeah, there's a lot of dissension and partisanship here. One area where there's very little partisanship is the recognition in a bipartisan way on the serious nature of the Chinese Communist Party threat. We are very united as senators on this topic, and that's really important for our allies to hear, and more importantly, it's really important for the dictator in Beijing to hear. We're very united, and it's going to stay that way because of the nature of the regime. So what we need to be doing is bringing all instruments of American power and American policy to address the Chinese Communist Party challenge. That's military, that's energy, that's technology, that's our private sector, that's our commitment to liberty and democracy. By the way, one of their biggest vulnerabilities is Xi Jinping fears his own people, right? That's why they don't allow TikTok to be seen in China. So I think this is a really important bill that fits one of the elements of our strategy on the tech side, particularly what they're doing to our citizens. Let me just give you one example. This might be a crazy notion, and if it is, you can dismiss it. But I'm a little curious. We have this big project. Some of you might hear that it's called the Willow Project in Alaska. It's a big energy project. We're trying to get it approved at the very high levels of the Biden administration. One of the things the Chinese fear more than anything in terms of our power is American energy. You read the reporting, Xi Jinping is scared to death of American energy dominance. TikTok in the last week has had over 300 million views relating to stopping this project. Whoa. Okay, maybe that's the good work of some of the lower 48 environmental groups, but maybe that's the Chinese Communist Party trying to influence young Americans on an issue that, in my view, is really, really important for our country and will strengthen our country. Something you might want to look into. I'm very curious about it myself. But the nature of this regime, the Chinese Communist Party regime, as Senator Thune said, is to lie. And we need to be aware of that. And this legislation really, really, I think, is an important bipartisan step to address a huge challenge that we face with regard to China right now. And now I want to call on Senator Baldwin.
Well, good afternoon, and to my colleagues, it is absolutely great to be up here with such a strong bipartisan group. We know that technology is changing rapidly, and Americans are increasingly using it to share our lives, promote our businesses, to stay connected. And every member up here uses technology to better connect with our constituents and serve the people we represent in our home states. And while these powerful tools have lots of benefits, in recent years we've seen companies owned by or controlled by our adversaries grow rapidly with little oversight and no transparency. Of course, a recent example is ByteDance, the Chinese technology company that owns TikTok. But the scope of this problem is far wider than one single company. While many of these technologies and platforms are popular, especially with our young people, we also know these products have the potential to endanger American users and threaten our entire national security. When it comes to platforms and products owned by foreign adversaries like the CCP, there is next to no transparency for users about where their data is being stored and what the information is being used for. That's why I'm proud to join my Democratic and Republican colleagues to introduce the Restrict Act to help our government protect Americans' data from foreign adversaries and to keep our country safe. This bipartisan legislation will empower us to respond to our changing media environment, giving the United States the tools that it needs to assess the threat of foreign-owned technology and, where appropriate, to take steps to restrict access. This legislation will give the United States authority to deal with today's foreign-owned tech companies, platforms, and products, while also establishing the infrastructure to address new and emerging foreign-owned products that could pose a threat in the future. Social media and technology, when used responsibly, they are powerful tools that can connect users, help folks start or grow their small businesses, and broaden horizons. But this is not always the case, and it's our job to ensure reasonable guardrails are in place to protect public safety, especially when it comes to foreign-owned entities that could weaponize Americans' data. What do I mean by weaponizing Americans' data? Through surveillance, identity theft, intellectual property theft, to name just a few examples. This legislation takes that common sense step forward to protect Wisconsinites and Americans online from social media and tech giants owned by foreign adversaries. And with that, I want to welcome to the microphone Senator Moran.
Tammy, thank you. Well, I'm pleased to be here in support of the Restrict Act. I thank my current chairman, Senator Warner, on the Intelligence Committee, and my former chairman on the Commerce Committee for their leadership in putting this legislation together and to bringing a group of serious senators to the table to see that we accomplish something. I'm hoping that this is the moment in which we do something in the United States Senate besides spending days, months, almost years doing confirmations. I'm more concerned about the future of our country now than I've ever been. That in part is because we need to pull together as a nation to to defeat the adversarial forces that are about to create difficulties, challenges, and in fact, the existential future of our country. We face tremendous challenges in this world, and it used to be that if we worried and took care of our military stance, that was sufficient. Today, it's important, but it's not sufficient. And our economy and certainly our access to our privacy, to our information becomes critical in this world we live in. Foreign adversary infiltration into our information and communication systems are a serious and growing challenge. These threats are not new, and they're not going away. The Department of Commerce needs the tools to review, to prevent, to mitigate, and really to prevent harmful products and services from continuing into tomorrow. Personal data and conversations must be out of the reach of the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. And I would say that I would welcome any of my colleagues behind me and my other colleagues in the United States Senate to rejoin our efforts that started a number of years ago to pass a comprehensive data privacy piece of legislation in a bipartisan way. This bill is a component of that privacy and an component of our national security, but we still desperately need to take on this issue in a broader way. And while we've come close, we have fallen short. The issue hasn't disappeared, and we need to pass serious and appropriate data privacy legislation in addition to the Restrict Act. Again, I thank my colleagues for the chance to join them and to be supportive, and I look forward to seeing this bill across the finish line.
Thank you, Jerry. 2 quick points, and then I'll start to take questions. We're going to restrict questions to this topic, and if anybody's got to sign off, I get it. One, and this was a point that Senator Romney made, but it really is important to repeat. Our beef here is with the Communist Party of China. It is not with the Chinese people. It is not with the Chinese diaspora. It is sure as heck not with Chinese Americans. And failure to make that point, frankly, plays into the propaganda agenda that oftentimes you see on WeChat and other Chinese-based apps. Second, those of us on the Intel Committee tomorrow are going to have the leadership of the intelligence community before us. And one of the things I think you're going to hear is that the traditional definition of national security, who's got the most tanks, guns, planes, and ships, which clearly is still critically important as we see the battle between Ukraine and Russia play out. But increasingly is also who wins the struggle for technology dominance. You know, the Congress in a bipartisan way recognized that around semiconductors, chips. We recognize that around the threat that Huawei placed. And this broad-based, rules-based approach, I think, will give us the tool, again, focused on those 6 nations that by law have been determined adversarial to take on these technology tools. So,
Senator, just a 2-part question for you. I take it you think a bunch of bills that we're seeing come forward that are just straight bans, where they seek to empower the president to ban this app, won't pass court muster, and then just separately for any of you, so many of you, Senator Manchin, you especially, just you've talked about how many people use this app. So just practically, how do you put the genie back in the bottle?
let me do 2 or 3 quick things. One, nothing in this bill, if passed, would authorize any government action going after any individual user. Let me be clear on that. There are ways, and again, Senator Bennett had suggested you could limit the sale on app stores, but if this bill becomes law, there's nobody individually is going to be held accountable. Secondly, one of the things, again, that Senator Thune emphasized, we want to make sure that we didn't invite other countries retaliating against the United States. So the idea of having a rules-based process that identifies types of technologies, we think will stand up better in court muster. And let me acknowledge as well that when we're talking about social media-based apps, whether they are foreign or domestic, there's a higher level of scrutiny. So we've listened to the outside legal experts on that issue. And I do think there are, Senator Thune and I, for example, have got legislation along with Senator Fisher on dark patterns. Some of these practices that frankly are used by American companies. We're focused today on foreign-based, but I'll let Joe answer if he wants or John answer if he wants, but I think there will be plenty of video-based, American-based applications that this bill would not affect at all. Do you want to add to that? Please.
So it seems like China, it's very obvious that China feels like they're taking a lot of heat from Congress. What you guys are doing, as well as what's happening on the House side with regards to the COVID origins, they'll just pass the bill to release that intel. So China's foreign minister just said that if the U.S. doesn't hit the brake and it continues to see down the wrong path, no amount of guardrails will prevent derailing and will surely be conflicts and confrontations. Do any of you have a reaction to this?
I'll let again my colleagues talk about that. I'll just point out this: $500 billion a year of intellectual property theft. For years, use of entities called the Confucius Institutes at many universities that were used to prey upon Chinese exchange students. In the case of TikTok, constant examples, even with the statements of TikTok that somehow Chinese engineers are not getting access to that American data, they are. And we have seen an authoritarian regime that literally changed Chinese law in 2016 that requires that any company based in China, their number one responsibility is not to their customers, not to their shareholders, it is to the Communist Party of China. That is a very different system than what we have in this country, for all the flaws of our system.
I would just say one thing on this. The foreign minister, if he would just basically evaluate what he's allowing American companies to do in his country and see if it makes common sense that we should do the same, and why he should be upset about us taking the actions we're taking. That's all.
And again, many of the American platform companies have already been banned in China. And I would also point out just one other thing. This is not on, not a lot of talk about TikTok here. Canada's taken this action. The EU's taken this action. India banned TikTok years ago.
Yes, Senator, on TikTok specifically, there is an ongoing security review that the White House and the agencies are doing under CFIUS. Last week there was a hearing in the House Foreign Affairs Committee where Democrats in particular suggested any legislation like this should wait until that process has played out. Was that discussion, did you guys have that discussion about CFIUS? And if so, why did you guys?
One, I can assure you that I've had some very positive conversations with House Democratic colleagues who I think are very interested in supporting this approach. Two, I think you'll see shortly a statement from the administration embracing this approach. Three, okay, well, it's good timing then. Three, this is, ancillary to CFIUS. CFIUS is still a process. We've got a safe harbor of CFIUS Acts first. But, CFIUS requires a transaction to trigger its tools. It doesn't deal at all with something that an enterprise, a foreign-based technology enterprise that might just enter the market without a transaction.
And really quickly, if you,
Well, we scared them right off already? Okay.
my understanding is that this bill will give the president additional authority, maybe get rid of some of the Berman Amendment things, to ban something like TikTok. I don't think it actually requires a ban.
No, this gives the Secretary of Commerce a series of tools to mitigate, divest, up to and including banning.
Will you guys be disappointed if the administration?
Listen, I think and again, I think Senator Manchin made this, and I'm not sure whether his granddaughters are going to be pleased him talking about them in front of y'all, but this is a popular application. I think it's going to be incumbent upon the government, to show its cards in terms of how this is a threat. I mean, I remember for years we would, some of us, my old friend Richard Burr and I, would go around and try to talk to our allies and, frankly, American telecom companies about the challenges Huawei presented. We didn't disclose and declassify enough of the intel, and consequently, we've had with leadership of people like Senator Wicker to go out and have to spend taxpayer dollars to rip and replace that equipment because it was a national security threat, but we weren't forthcoming enough early on. You want to add anything?
No, I think that's right.
Joe?
Here we go. It wasn't just the Chinese foreign minister, it was also China's President Xi Jinping today who said that the U.S. was trying to suppress China. I mean, in the wake of this, the Chinese spy balloon, what you all have learned about TikTok, what's your message to the Chinese president?
Well, my message is our economies are inexorably tied, and there are certain areas we're going to have to collaborate. But the idea of China having a win at all costs in terms of technology domination, China's actions in the South China Seas. I just came back from a trip to India where there are Chinese troops massed on the Indian border at a level that's extraordinarily aggressive. Chinese investment in technology domain after technology domain. This is the competition of this century. And again, I think Senator Manchin probably said it, and again, I'll ask Jerry or John if they want to add on to this. Look at how Chinese enterprises have treated joint ventures with not just American, but other European. The requirement of moving the intellectual property over. This theft of intellectual property doesn't just go against America, it goes against a number of nations. The whole notion that many of us operated, and I was part of this, in the beginning of the 20th century, is the more you bring China into the WTO and the international order, the more it will adhere to international rules and norms. It just hasn't proven to be the case. Guys, do you want to?
Said it well. Yeah. No, I just think Mark's point is the right one, and that is that, if you're doing business in China, your number one allegiance has to be to the CCP. We have a free market economy. We have a Constitution, a Bill of Rights, and the rule of law. And so when we go about a process like this, it has to be orderly. It has to be a way that can withstand legal challenge. And we think that this does that, rather than, picking out, kind of hand-picking, we talked about this earlier, the whack-a-mole strategy of this particular technology, this particular company. This creates something that I think complements what CFIUS does and gets at the heart of the matter, and that is the fact that China, through their technology, is stealing Americans' data and their information. And of course, as we know, their administration lies on a daily basis. So I think the message is, yes, we have a symbiotic relationship with China when it comes to our two economies, but that has to be conducted in an open, transparent way in which we have an opportunity to determine whether or not they are not playing by the rules. And I think this process enables that to happen.
And again, we just point out as well, remember that one of the first examples of this wasn't even a Chinese entity. It was Kaspersky Software, which was Russian-based, and literally took us years to get it off the GSA acquisition list. Please.
Mr. Chairman, is there any provision in your legislation that would prevent predatory data brokers from collecting information here in the U.S. and then sending it to a foreign entity?
Great question. By expanding the definition of ICTS, or in terms of telecom and communications-related entities, I think a number of us are concerned about that predatory activity, but there would have to be that rules-based process that Commerce Department would have to show how usage of that data and potentially turning it over to an adversarial nation, China or otherwise, would be a national security risk. I think the case could be made, but that would be part of the process. Please.
The Commerce Secretary indicated in an interview, I think it was about a month ago or so, about TikTok specifically, that banning it would be a politically unpopular thing to do with young people. I wonder if you worry at all about any of your colleagues in the Senate or in the House making a political calculation and voting against this type of legislation because young people won't.
Politics in the Congress?
They won't be happy with it.
Well,
is that a legitimate concern?
People will have to make their own decision. Setting up a rules-based process to go after foreign technology that interferes with our national security. And I think when we see the case that's already made, when we see the amount of data that TikTok says they protect, and frankly, story after story where it's not protected, I will trust that the vast majority of us, regardless of party, will do the right thing. And I would never underestimate the ability of American technology to provide like-kind products with better protections. We'll take just a couple more, please.
You mentioned how ingrained TikTok is in American society, particularly among young people. There are a number of your colleagues who still use TikTok here on Capitol Hill. Lots of elected officials across the country also use it. They say it's to reach younger audiences and everything. What is your message to them, those of your colleagues who are still using it?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of creative activity on TikTok. It has been a very effective tool for people to gain prominence as social influencers. I'm not by any means decrying that everything on TikTok is somehow bad. It's not. But we've got two challenges that I think is one of the reasons why the CFIUS process has taken so long and why these tools could be useful is you got 100 million Americans, 90 minutes a day, the potential for that American data, combined with things like data brokers, to end up residing someplace in Beijing, and the ability of the CCP to manipulate the kind of videos. I don't know what Senator Sullivan talked about, but if that proves to be the case, you know, I do know that there is a, not by the name of TikTok, but there is a variation on TikTok that is shown to Chinese youth and emphasizes science, education, work hard, be a patriot. Not so much for our kids. So, you know, I think this has been moving quickly. And I think everybody, you know, again, it was 2 years ago, or roughly 2 years, the military banned it. Around Christmas that the Senate took, you know, unanimous action. I think the House took virtually unanimous action as well. So I think this is something that we're all getting educated along the process. Last question.
What would you say to the millions of Americans who use this app every day and say they have a right to use it and that this would ban or violate their First Amendment rights?
What I'd say is there is a higher level standard on social media apps. So we have to demonstrate, or the administration would have to demonstrate, that data is being stored and potentially utilized by the CCP. And there have been plenty of press reports where TikTok engineers have actually targeted individual journalists or data has been found, or the potential in terms of the manipulation of the videos that could end up being an agent of propaganda or malign influence. You know, we made similar type judgments in terms of Russian interference in 2016. I think the vast majority of Americans, when they fully understand the potential threat, will do the right thing.
What's the limit here to using national security to shut down any app the government wants?
Well, again, we have a limit that is, it is coming, communication technologies coming from 6 designated countries, a rules-based process, a requirement that the IC, as much as possible, without giving up sources and methods, would disclose the reasons why the government would reach a conclusion. So it's not just trust us, it's look at the data. And yeah, again, I'll end where I started, which is we've seen this play out with Huawei, with ZTE. We've seen it as we now go into the competition around artificial intelligence and quantum computing, synthetic biology, advanced energy. I absolutely believe that China, with its authoritarian values dominating those technologies, is not in the national security interest of our country, or for that matter, people across the world who don't live in authoritarian regimes. Thank you all very much. I'm sure we'll have more to say later.
Time for one more, sir, about the White House?
I would consider myself a little bit of an adventurer. I like skydiving, hiking.